And if you stay in the mist, you gon' be soaked. So listen up, cause this hair of the dog, what's real, what ain't? Is this the fog or smog? Cause there's a difference when you breathe it in. So don't let the corporate media take you for a spin. This that morning show, they put you in the know. So I hope that you ready, cause all we do is go, go, go. Yeah, come get your info, you gon' be like, whoa. Hair of the dog, we bout that, ayy.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Monday morning. This is Hair of the Dog, your cure for the neoliberal hangover. So we have a lot to talk about, and we're celebrating DNC Convention Week, Day 1. So we have some information about programming and how we are going to help you stay tuned to all the things they're doing. But today we want to cover some really special topics and help you understand exactly how campaigns work, what you're seeing right now, and what you're going to see going into the general so that you can make an informed decision. But joining me this morning from the remote wilds of Canada in the camper is Andy Kennedy. Good morning, Andy.
Good morning, Carrie. How are things in civilization?
Right. So we appreciate your dedication, even though you're camping and out having a wonderful vacation time, frolicking with all the beavers and geese. We appreciate
Gooses.
Gooses. We appreciate that you took the time out of your schedule and your beer drinking to join us this morning. Thank you.
That's certainly not a problem. And plus, let's just be clear that this is go home day. So, typically you want to remain relatively sober for the drive home.
Oh, but you have a camper. You could sleep in the back and make Nurse Deb drive, right?
No.
Oh, no, not happening, not happening. So
she doesn't like driving the truck without a camper attached to it.
Ah, gotcha. Understandable, understandable. Well, we appreciate you being here and somewhat sober. So this is great. Thank you.
You are very welcome.
So let's get into it this morning because this is kind of a hot topic and a little bit tough to talk about. So what we're going to do today is kind of get into this idea of the social stack and purity tests, right? So whenever you have a progressive candidate going up against a neoliberal establishment candidate or a neocon, you will always get this cry foul from corporate about purity tests. Well, our purity tests go to policy. Their purity tests happens to weaponize the social stack, weaponize all sorts of things, including, as we have seen, the Me Too movement. When you had allegations against a favorite candidate, Me Too went to the wayside. However, they rolled it back out in some very unique ways in this election that we want to talk about. Some of these allegations are pretty flimsy. Others are just downright ridiculous. So from this framework, where do we start? And I want to, full disclosure, I was a candidate in the Democratic Party. I was a member of the Democratic Party back in 2016. I was a Bernie endorsed candidate, one of two in our entire county here where I live. And that did not sit well with my own Democratic Party. So what happened in my household was we approached campaigning the way that you approach a military exercise, right? So I had my husband who is very big into military type of breaking down the objective and winning the war. That's what a campaign is. It is a bloodless war. And if you don't believe it, you've never been a candidate or worked close enough with a campaign. It is absolutely the truth. So in our situation, my husband, who was very dedicated, he ended up recruiting 6 Democratic candidates, 9 election judges, 20 precinct committee people, and we, in my campaign, walked over 35 miles canvassing in just a county race, a partial county race. And to the point where even the Republicans were like, holy shit. The chairman at the time said, I wish she was a Republican because they are really putting out the effort, and we terrified them by doing this. So our own Democratic Party, because they are themselves not really Democrats, they are just wearing blue jumpsuits, decided that they needed to get rid of my husband and definitely needed to get rid of me. So I took all of this experience and put it in an article that was published on Undercovered magazine. It's called Dirty Deeds, and I'll post a link to that. But in that article, what I did at the end, trying to be helpful and educate people, is all the things they did to me personally, all the things they did to my family, all the things they did to my congressional candidate, whom I later volunteered for. These are actual things that we saw happening from the Democratic establishment towards progressive candidates. So I'm going to put up that list real quick. And again, I will include a link to this particular story because I think you will see these things as a progressive candidate or a volunteer yourself. They're not necessarily creative in the way that they do things, but this is some of their toolkit in maintaining policy control and making sure that their own candidates are in here. So number one on the list, discrediting campaign staff through reputation targeting with the goal of removing them from a campaign, slander and libel actions, targeting the candidate themselves. And here's one of the really horrible things they did to my progressive congressional candidate. Is this was a gentleman who had a distinguished 23-year career, top producer in his company for all that time. And they would do things like they would call up his boss or the senior VP and say, hey, we really appreciate you allowing our candidate to campaign on company time. That is so generous of you. And just making those kind of statements gets that person fired. So then they can talk about that person being fired. And we're going to go through this because that one has come into play a couple times during this election cycle on different candidates. Then other things about withholding resources, which we've seen, dark money PACs to purchase defamatory collateral. That is the big one that we're going to talk about today, where we're seeing that happen right now. Then the other part of it is threatening volunteers, threatening their employment, threatening other people who are supportive of it. All of these things, not new, but tried and true because they actually work. And they only work because you're not familiar with it. And we have this idea that we have the moral high ground, right, on the left. So these things would never happen. They would never do this, right?
No. Well, it's a tactic that the reason it happens so often is because it works, right? The front page of the newspaper is where the allegation comes out. The retraction is on page 37.
If there's a retraction at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot where that's not coming in. So good morning, Mike, and to our viewers here. So just a reminder, if this is the first time you're tuning in, we do see most of the comments that come in. Sometimes tech isn't working right, but for the most part, we see most of the comments come in, especially if you're on our Facebook page commenting. So join the conversation. If you think we're wrong, you think we're totally out of bounds, or you think I'm completely nuts, let's talk about it. Let's weigh in here. So
and all of the above.
Yes, yeah, 100%. So one of the pieces that I think where, you mentioned it, the allegation is all you need, right? You don't need to substantiate it with claims. You don't need to back it up with all sorts of detail. And one that we've experienced here, and me personally, when people who are on the left decide to weaponize all of this sort of thing, is one of our former members here, Don Ford, personally made me accountable and told everyone that I had him fired and stole his company. And he neglected to mention that there are, what are we, 8 or 10 employees of the company?
Yeah, at the time there were 8.
Okay. So, so all he had to do was go on Facebook, call me out by my name, and make these wild allegations like I was trying to have him killed, that I was trying to buy a life insurance policy on him and collect the proceeds. And nobody questioned how crazy that sounded, nor that none of that is even remotely possible. if you understand how the law and insurance works. But he kept going on and on with it. And he himself made threats to me. He made threats to other members of progressive organizations, all of these things. But I am so pleased now that, number one, we merged with another company, DLF, to get away from that. But then I actually have confirmation from the state of California that Progressive Insider is now closed. So if Don Ford owned the company, there's no way that our organization could close it in California and move on. You can't close a business you don't own. So to all the Don Fords out there, all he had to do was make the accusation, and how many people would never question it? And it came down to my reputation. I had to defend it or I didn't. We chose not to. We chose to not give him airtime. So this is another example of how people on the left are not, they're perpetuating and allowing these types of behaviors to happen because they don't ask basic questions. So today we're going to ask those basic questions and kind of go through some other agencies that haven't done their due diligence. So
I think this year has been a very strange. Well, obviously, 2020 has been an unprecedented year, right? And I think people are just shell shocked with a lot of this stuff, and that's why these allegations go so much farther, because you can't dedicate a lot of brain power to one specific thing because there's so many different things coming at us as far as the pandemic and the impending election and you've got the progressives are looking at a election between, we're once again the lesser of two evils, right? Didn't learn anything in 2016. There's just so much for people to think about that when an allegation comes along, you just kind of put it in its file folder and, put it away because you just can't, it's just too hard to deal with them one-on-one because they're just coming in waves, right?
Right, and I get that. You get that kind of fatigue because, we always make the joke, and I post it on my own Facebook page, who had fire tornadoes, which is now a thing. Then you won bingo, and someone on my page went, well, I had aliens. I'm like, no, you won in July. That already came true. So when you have this level of, what do you call it?
Shell shock?
Yeah, it's just all this incredible stuff is happening and it doesn't even feel real. So something that is human, a human element of bad behavior kind of does go by the wayside. You just kind of, But however, if we are going to fight the good fight, we have to be vigilant against some of these things. So the first thing I want to cue up here is Crystal Ball on Rising talked about one of these allegations that came out. This is Alex Morris. He's a mayor, and what happened was, and this is part of my list, where you have these Democratic aligned groups either outright co-opted or cooperating with these kind of allegations and hit pieces. So in this case, you had the college Dems who went after a progressive candidate who was doing very well. So of course you can't allow that to happen. So the college Dems decided to put out some spurless allegations against Mayor Morris. So I'm going to cue up Crystal because I think she can, explain it pretty well on her own. So here's Crystal.
All right, Crystal, what's on your radar?
Well, as we reported here yesterday, congressional candidate Alex Morris is facing allegations of improper conduct by several groups of college Dems. Well, I guess that's what he stands accused of because, frankly, the allegations are rather vague and also because it is far from clear that any reasonable person would call them improper. So here's the background. Morris is a high-profile Justice Dem battling Democratic incumbent Richie Neal. Neal is the powerful chair of the House Ways and Means Committee who is adamantly opposed to progressive causes and adamantly aligned with corporate interests. Longtime viewers will recall Sagar's incredible radar trashing Neal for holding a birthday party to celebrate AIG's pillaging of the public purse. Now, after watching progressives like Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush notch big upset wins against entrenched incumbents, it was looking like Morse, a 31-year-old gay mayor with working-class roots, may actually have a shot here. The election is now just weeks away. But now the race has been thrown into turmoil after the College Democrats of Massachusetts alleged that Morse had conducted himself improperly. So according to the Daily Collegian, the College Dems alleged that Morse had matched with students on dating apps, added College Dems to his close friend's Instagram story, and had sexual contact with students at the schools in question. Now, the most detailed allegation comes courtesy of the Boston Globe, which reports that one student who had a sexual encounter with Morse found out afterward that Morse was a lecturer and mayor and felt uncomfortable upon learning that information. The Young Dems claimed that Morse abused his status and position, although this kind of seems like the opposite of Morse abusing his status and position for romantic ends, since this person literally didn't know Morse's status and position. For his part, Morse has absolutely denied that any of the relationships were non-consensual, apologized for making anyone uncomfortable, and clarified that he did not have sexual interactions with his own students. So guys, look, I read all this over, I took it all in, sat with it, turned it over in my head, and I cannot possibly imagine why any of this matters. What is even being alleged here? That as a young gay man, he went on dates with other young gay men? That he followed people on Instagram? That he used dating apps? Now look, perhaps there are other allegations to emerge, and of course, we should take them as they come, if they come. But are liberals really appointing themselves morality czar now, passing judgment on consensual adult bedroom activities? As Ryan Grimm put it, if Morse hooked up with a 20-year-old plumber, nobody would rightly care. But they're a student, so they have to be protected by the purity police. Ridiculous.
Right. So note that she put Ryan Grimm in there. Ryan Grimm is the DC bureau chief for the Intercept, a publication that I love, and for the most part, is very ethically sound. They do their due diligence and adhere to journalistic integrity, except in one case. And I'm going to get to that in a minute, but remember Ryan Grimm and the Intercept. So real quick, Jeffrey, good morning. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. Mike says he's got, and I can never pronounce these, it's a Cthulhu thing for September, and I'm going to tell you, Mike, you already won, because there is a new series coming out for Cthulhu, so you'll enjoy that. So that was Crystal. So let's break this down a little bit, Andy. If I'm the DNC, and I've got some money and connections behind me, here's how we do it. And we saw this when we did that segment way back on Operation Mockingbird. So I'm going to hand a hot, juicy tip off to a reporter at a publication that's friendly to me. And I'm going to just drop it with them and make sure that they publish it. At the same time, I'm going to coordinate that with other different media outlets, social media, and then I can pay to boost all of those publications and those stories, right? So as Crystal talked about, that's exactly what happened with the College Dems. You had the College Dems public with their shaming of this candidate for how dare he date. And then you had all of these publications go with it. And then you can just go ahead and boost those posts so that everybody sees it. And that's the key. Because, you know, Andy, you said it, we are just so shell-shocked, and all this election and all this crap happening, and we're just trying to survive. It's a candidate who doesn't have a whole lot of money cannot reach the voter 18 times the way the DNC heavily funded corporate media can, right?
Right, exactly. Well, was it the one of the congressional races in Tennessee where the progressive was able to raise $6,240, and the establishment candidate raised $2.1 million. It was a slight discrepancy. Like, that's what we see. Well, the one thing that I wanted to comment on is that it seems that it's expected that congressional races happen now, and it all depends on how well you're able to attack, right?
Oh. Your beer fell over.
Actually, no, it's the phone. I don't know if it's because the beer is too cold. But it's, like we see that your successes, as a lot of times, is displayed in how well you attack your opponents or attack things or groups or anything, like committees. We were talking and I've talked about this before. We talked about the Bernie Sanders race, how Bernie was wildly criticized while he was still, in the race before he suspended his campaign in the debate with Biden, and how he didn't go on the attack, and where people figured, well, he could have ended it right there. He could have displayed how horrible a candidate Joe Biden was simply by going on the attack, right? Not understanding that a politician like Bernie Sanders, who has been, spent his entire political career talking policy and not falling back on attacking the other candidate to make yourself look better, right? That's abhorrent to him. And I know I've said this before, that he's given interviews to explain that, especially after he suspended his campaign, and asking Bernie Sanders to attack another politician instead of talking about policy is like asking him to rip off his arm and hand it to you. You just can't do that, right? It doesn't happen. But the main criticism was, well, he needed to attack. He needed to, bare his teeth and get his claws and just destroy Biden. Mm-hmm. And he just wasn't capable of that, right? We live in a time now where we don't discuss policy. We just, how well can you attack your opponent?
Oh, absolutely. And, to his credit, they were salivating, waiting for him to do that. And what would have happened is they'd have trotted out that social stack. So for anyone who's not familiar with the concept of social stack, this comes from the far left, and it's meant to, it can be used in several different ways. The original intent was inclusivity, right? So think of it as poker chips, and I had to have somebody explain this to me because it just blew my mind that this is a concept. But based on your minority status, it gave you another chip in the class. So if you had a minority race, that's your chip. If you had a disability, there's another chip. If you have a gender discriminatory historical issue like female, transgender, whatever, there's another stack. And what it meant was your value in the conversation was raised based on that stack. So it sounds like a good concept. However, what has happened is it's been weaponized. So what that means is, if Andy as a white man makes a suggestion or comment, or in this case Bernie Sanders makes a suggestion or comment that I, as a K-Hive member, neoliberal, whatever, want to silence, then I can use that social stack to turn it around on him, cry victim, and shut him down completely. And that is how the DNC and these neoliberals are using what started as a good intent against all of our policies and helping us to also silence those voices. So it works.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
One of my most memorable experiences on Twitter, and this was back when none of the real candidates had dropped out yet. And I remember going on a rather popular tweet that had, thousands and thousands of people either agreeing or disagreeing or whatever, and saying that all I said was, I fear that if Bernie Sanders doesn't win the nomination, it could mean the end of human beings' ability to live on the planet, or I fear for the future of humanity, something to that nature. Not, saying anything bad about any of the other candidates, or really just kind of a statement of fact. was attacked mercilessly by, and you'll like this, by mostly Kamala Harris.
K-Hive, yep.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's mighty white of you.
Yes.
Right? For simply making a statement of that nature, right? And saying, well, that's interesting that you would say that when there was really nothing even racially or genders or discriminatory in anything that I had just said, and turning it around and saying, oh, just another, racist white guy that's trying to get his the white candidate, right? And that's exactly what happened. It was a ganging up from groups of Harris supporters, right? Simply because I said something about a white candidate. And that was very telling to me early on in the campaign.
Oh, and K-Hive they were still out there thriving. In fact, they got our own journalist, Rome Bethia, shut out of Twitter. He's now back for everybody who's looking for Rome. But yeah, so here you had K-Hive, who was using the social stack for a minority status and female, use it against a minority male journalist to get him shut out of Twitter. So this is how the social stack works. So getting back to Crystal and her end with Ryan Grimm on The Intercept. The Intercept has actually been doing some really good reporting on the policy of using social stack, the Me Too movement, and all of this. So they just came out with another article. This is Amy McGrath's Senate campaign. And you remember early on when I talked about my own congressional candidate losing his job because of DNC operatives. Here again, it happened. So if you will recall, I think it was like a week ago, 2 weeks ago, we were talking about the whole primary race and how there was only, the Democrats were not at all bothered that there was one polling location for 600,000 people because that location happened to be in Louisville, Kentucky, where the progressive had his home base. So they didn't complain about that at all. Voter disenfranchisement, they didn't care. So long as Amy McGrath prevailed in the primary. And this particular gentleman here, Mr. Jones, Matt Jones, runs a sports, he ran a sports show on a very popular program. And he had gone to Chuck Schumer, flew to DC, met with Chuck Schumer, said Chuck was really nice, but he kind of favored Amy McGrath for the primary because Matt was wanting to run. So he went there to, essentially see, is it okay? What do you think? Do I need to kiss the ring? Whatever. And Chuck Schumer said, well, Amy's good for raising money. We like her for that. It was not about her policy or whatever. It's not the fact that Amy McGrath is a carpetbagger and all of these other things that the people in the area hate. I mean, who loves a carpetbagger, right? So what happened was he was getting ready to run, and he's some pretty stiff competition because if you have airplay and you are very popular, you become a top contender. And Amy McGrath's campaign manager could not have that. So what he did was he got Matt Jones fired from his radio program. And on this article, I'll include a link to it. He was openly bragging about getting him fired. And he was pulled from the air temporarily because the station had this very staunch, nonpartisan stance. But Amy McGrath's campaign manager went out and made sure that people knew that he was very much partisan and he needs to be taken off the air. So the exact same thing that I mentioned that happened to my candidate, 23-year great salesperson, call up his employer and now he's unemployed. He can't provide for his family, certainly can't run for Congress, and he can't raise the funds necessary to combat a DNC anointed candidate, right? So this whole idea that the Democrats have an impartiality to their primaries, Nancy Pelosi herself said it, that we see no problem with Steny Hoyer manipulating primaries. In fact, that's how we do it. And in fact, I know that I'm not dissuading the Dem Inter thing because I think if enough of you show up and stand together, you can prevail. However, what happens is you get that sheep mentality where, oh, I don't want to be singled out. I look what happened to that guy. I don't want to do it. So the way that these caucuses and votes work is they already handpick their successor at the local party, and the vote is just a formality, right? So if you can get
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. Like, look at what happened when the Sunrise Movement was involved in California when they were trying to get a specific debate on just climate change.
mm-hmm.
And we saw that when it came to the vote, you had a whole bunch of progressives there that were speaking out in favor of it and talking about it. We found out that when the DNC went to vote for it, Tom Perez, who's the head, has the ability to populate the DNC voters with corporate lobbyists and people that are ready to vote against something like that, and it had no chance, right? And
Yeah.
that's the way the vote ended up.
Right, and so it was interesting to me that we're seeing the same thing with the issue with the post office. You had Dr. What's his name, Dr. Johnson, come out with this crazy tweet that, oh, by the way, Bernie stopped. It's Bernie's fault that we have this problem with the post office now because Bernie stopped the appointment of several people to this organization that oversees the post office. So blame Bernie for it. And he totally neglected to mention that the appointees that Obama was trying to put in wanted to do the exact same thing that Trump is doing. And it was the postal workers who asked Senator Sanders to stop it. He neglected to say any of that. So we would have had the same situation with the post office earlier as we see today. So it's all of this. You just need to make the allegation because people aren't going to pull it back and they're not going to piece through it and look at it. So this is what's happening in political campaigns as well. So
and the whole thing with the post office absolutely ludicrous anyways. And it's the whole reason this is happening. I don't know why the general public can't make the connection, right? Because Trump's biggest push right now is that he's deathly afraid of mail-in ballots, right? Mm-hmm. Because that means that a lot of your vehicles for stopping people from voting, right, voter suppression, will be negated by mail-in balloting. So what do? You defund the post office, the one vehicle that can make mail-in balloting a possibility. It's like, why is that such a hard concept to grasp? Why can't we make that connection?
Right, and you can see the map. There are maps all over the place. And I'll see if we can get one posted here where you can see those districts and counties that went, that are typically Republican but went for Hillary, are the same ones that are being targeted where they're removing postal mailboxes, they're removing sorting machines, removing all of that sort of thing. So they're not stupid. They have gone through, pulled the data, and they are targeting these areas specifically. So
I love that a lot of people right now are saying that, well, we should just scrap the post office because they're not profitable, right? The government service is not profitable. So what we should do is we should let Jeff Bezos and Amazon take over the vehicle of delivering the mail, right? So then it's profitable. And let me see, how was Jeff Bezos able to make all the money he made? Oh, maybe because he gets to use the post office to deliver all his product basically for free.
Oh, and it's funny you bring up that point because the gentleman who was appointed, who's making all these decisions on behalf of the post office, has purchased excessive, well, even purchasing one bit of Amazon stock puts him in an ethical violation and conflict of interest. He didn't purchase just one. So now next week he's going before the Senate for an emergency hearing. We will cover all of that because that will be juicy and delightful. But I want to get back to real quick the campaign strategy for neoliberal corporate Democrats, especially when we have so many progressives who have prevailed in the primary. What you're going to see in the general is the DNC either step back, pull their support from someone like Corey in St. Louis or other progressives in West Virginia. We had like 4 female progressives win in West Virginia. You're going to see them pull back money and support, or openly help the Republicans, as Joe Biden himself campaigned for a Republican in, what was it, Pennsylvania? I think it was Pennsylvania. And then you had, what's his face down in Texas? Beto O'Rourke campaigned for a Republican against a female progressive in Texas, so she lost her race. So these are the things that you're going to start to see roll out, even though we have a little bit of a compressed general cycle. The one that I really wanted to focus on, because I've been waiting and sitting on this one for weeks, waiting for clarification of some allegations that came out. And this was actually the Intercept. They put out their own hit piece from a journalist that I had never seen published there before. So I was trying to track down her, but they put out a story about sexual harassment allegations against Shahid Buttar, who's running against Nancy Pelosi in San Francisco and California. So you talk about a #1 battleground race. That's it. So
right, and let's also make sure that we clarify, if you haven't been keeping score, right, that this race has been about the challenger in Shahid Buttar, who has been out front and center everywhere, going to, with mask on, going out into to the district and speaking to people and doing things, doing charitable work and talking and weighing in and all this stuff, as opposed to Pelosi, who basically, I guess, just sits in her kitchen and eats ice cream because she's refused to debate him. I personally think she'd be absolutely destroyed in a debate with Shahid, but that's my own personal appearance. Right, so that's the stage I'm setting up, is that this has been so one-sided that all the centrist candidate has done is basically just rested on her laurels.
Oh, absolutely. Let's not forget when she threw children out of her office who were just asking for a chance to live. So that was the Sunrise Group. So here is my perspective when I came at this. First off, I do adhere to the journalism ethics code. So that means be objective, check your sources, vet it, all of that sort of thing. So even though I support progressive policy, I have to approach this as, is this credible, right? And then from the other standpoint, I went through the Me Too thing where my female-owned minority business was targeted by Democratic operatives. At the same time, those same people were using my campaign donations to buy themselves an award for a Me Too push, right? So you had this complete hypocrisy. And then the third portion of this, the reason why I am hypersensitive to any type of allegation of harassment, sexual harassment, toxicity in the workplace, I am a survivor on many levels. So my particular concern going into this allegation was, these are some pretty hefty things that are being said, so I want to pull it apart, because I know that in this weaponizing of the social stack and how things actually transpire, you can actually hurt victims who are legitimate in their complaints by posting something that doesn't meet that level or standard, right? So if you hurt my feelings, that is not harassment. If you and I disagree on something and you yell at me in the workplace, inappropriate, not harassment. So this is where I personally struggled, and I talked to some of my girlfriends and tried to, I was like, okay, I've been in these situations. I'm trying to be objective. I know that things have moved on from where I was in corporate situations and other things. Am I looking at it like, maybe you should just suck it up? Or has, our culture moved on from that kind of behavior into something different. And it's kind of a mix of both. So I approached this story trying to be as objective as I possibly could and focused on facts. What was provable? Because when you get to a he said, she said, it becomes difficult, right? So you got to look at what is provable, what tangible proof you had. We saw that with Tara Reid. We saw that with all of these other allegations. What is provable? So that is where I approached this story. So here's what I looked at, right? I'm going to start with, we went back to the DNC and their journals and something, you know, all of that sort of thing. So 48 Hills is an independent San Francisco news publication. Independent does not necessarily mean objectively progressive. They might be a little more liberal. So they launched one of the stories too. So at the same time, you had the Intercept plus 48 Hills, plus a bunch of different publications come out because this is big news. This guy had the audacity to challenge Nancy Pelosi and actually prevailed in the runoff in the primary. So he's going to face off against Nancy Pelosi in the general. How crazy is this? And when I read this article by this particular gentleman who regurgitated the same allegations but didn't seem to do his own homework, in the body of the article, he actually says why he wrote this. And he says that he has a belief that a member of Congress is a lifetime job, which it's not. And he's making the question, should it be this Senator Scott Weiner, whom I don't know, or should it be Nancy Pelosi's daughter? Who do we want to give this to? We need to be really careful about who we elect because it's a lifetime job. First, you know, Mr. Tim here, fuck you. It is not a lifetime job. It was never meant to be a lifetime job. The fact that Nancy Pelosi got this job and ran for, what is it, 18, 17 cycles? That is a failure of democracy, is what that is. And let's look at how many times she has actually been credibly challenged and what kind of behavior happened in these campaigns, which is exactly what we're talking about. So he gives you right here the reason he wrote this story. So right there, I'm like, something's not right here. And when I looked at the allegations here, there were a couple points that I pulled apart, right? So you had DSA San Francisco, who said that they had 3 members of his campaign who came to them privately at the same time as the campaign manager, Jasper Wild, brought these allegations, and it wasn't even 24 hours later, before they even talked to Shahid Buttar, before they did any investigation, that they rescinded their endorsement of Mr. Buttar. That was another one I went, something's not right here. If you're going to be a progressive and you have these kind of allegations, even if you have 3 or 4 people come to you, you still have to do your due diligence. You still have to go through the investigation. It should be somewhat slow and pragmatic. You should be able to look at these statements and pull these things apart before you make a decision. DSA did not do that. That was another one. I was like, something's up here. So, right. So then I went and looked at what the DSA letter said, and they said that one of the members was shocked that that Mr. Buttar, who claimed to be a progressive, was making over $100,000 in the campaign while the rest of them were underpaid. And how misogynistic is that? I'm like, there's something I can go look up. So for those of you who are not familiar with the way campaigns work, you have to file quarterly reports. And if it's a congressional campaign federal level, those reports go to an organization called the FEC, Federal Elections Commission. And all of that data is publicly available. If you're not as adept with the FEC database, because it is a little wonky, you can go to a group like Open Secrets, opensecrets.org, and they pull that data too. And they have nice little charts about all the dark PACs and campaigns and who's spending on what. So there was a data point that I could go look up. So of course I did. And here's what I found. So this allegation that Shahid was being paid $100,000, not true. And I gotta tell you, I know the FEC database pretty well, so it took me all of maybe 7 minutes to pull this up. So as a journalist, what you're supposed to do is check the facts. If somebody gives you a point of material fact, you have to go and verify it. On none of these articles, from the Intercept to 48 Hill, none of them checked it. And I tell you, it took me 7 minutes to pull this data. So that was another piece. I was like, okay, what's happening? What's going on here? So now I'm going to make an allegation of my own that is absolutely unsubstantiated, and I'm not going to know if I'm right for another 2 months. So what happens is, if an organization is in need of money or in-kind donations or some sort of quid pro quo, that's a really easy way to co-opt them, right? And I know that DSA San Francisco is always in need of money. I know, as a donor to the Intercept, they are always in need of money. What's going on here? So the way that the funding works, I'm going to have to go through each and every one of these PACs, each and every one of the organizations, and see what the filing report comes out with in 2 months. And then I'll have to check it again in 3 months, because sometimes they don't file it appropriately and then they file a correction, right? So it's going to take a little bit of, by the time I get this information, if I'm right, will you care? Probably not. So this is kind of a catch-22 I'm in. So then the other thing I looked at was there were allegations that Jasper, who's the campaign manager who was making these allegations, she said that there was a misogyny in the whole campaign. So I went out and looked, okay, what is misogyny? This is treating women differently than you would treat men. So if I'm female and I work in a campaign and I have an idea that gets rejected, doesn't necessarily mean that it was a good idea that got rejected, unless the gentleman next to me, the male, makes the same suggestion. They go, oh, way to go. Yeah, great idea. Then, okay, whatever. That is not what she was alleging. So when I looked at it, the top 2 employees in the campaign, female, right? Or identify as female. So I'm like, okay, something is really up here. And then at the same time, Ms. Wild came out with her statements. There was this other woman, Elizabeth Crinden, who is a comedian, who said that Shahid had sexually harassed her a decade ago. So the problem that I had was, when you have all of these allegations and you have the points that you can actually pull up in disagreement with each other, where does the we believe her come in? And in this case, let me see if I have these. Let's see if I can add it here. There were a bunch of Twitter people that knew both of the people who said that they believe Shahid, and then the reputation of somebody like Elizabeth. Now, I don't want to tear her down, but there's enough out there that suggests that maybe there's more to this story, right? She has a false allegation against Kevin Zisi, who happens to be the campaign manager for Howie Hawkins. So she went after him 2006, and she was thrown out by the judge in Maryland. So here we kind of have a pattern. You have to weigh all of these things in. And what I'm not seeing is corporate media or any of these people who are supporting these allegations go through that kind of discernment. And I got to tell you, and I've said this publicly, I approached Ms. Jasper Wild. I asked her, why do your own FEC filings that you filed on behalf of the campaign, why are they not in agreement with your statements now? And why are your own donations to Act Blue reflecting that you weren't sure if you worked for the campaign in November and October? You told the FEC that you didn't, but we know that you did while you were making these donations through Act Blue to another campaign. So there are a lot of questions that I had that did not get addressed by Ms. Wild. So when I asked her about this, she said that she was going to come out with a formal statement, which she did. So she published this on Medium, and I'll include the link so you can go look at it. And this is where I came to a personal dilemma here, because I read her complaint. I read some of the detail that she put in there about why she said it was a toxic environment and harassment and things like that. And I personally don't see it. I don't see it. And the reason I don't see it is because a campaign is not, it's a different environment than your corporate or your mom and pop shop or whatever, because you have a finite amount of time, not enough people, not enough resources, and you literally, in my case, I am now up to 6 death threats because I have been a candidate and volunteered for campaigns. It is quite literally warfare without, hopefully, bloodshed. And just feelings are going to get hurt. There is no time for a drum circle. There's no time for your feelings. You've got to get these 50 things done in the next hour and deal with people who are volunteers who are coming and going. And oh my goodness, this volunteer is actually an operative for your the people you're running against, or all of these things are going on in a finite amount of time. There is no time until after the election to sit down and piece through and make amends for the things you said and all of that. It's just, it's not a work environment like your corporate thing. Should it be held to a higher standard? Yeah. But I didn't see anything in her statement that rose to the level of harassment and toxicity on that level that we understand it. So where am I wrong on this?
And that, obviously that information will be, like you said, available for everyone to see after the fact, just because of what's happening. And we have to remember that the timing of all of this is very suspicious as well, because of, how many more days do we have to the election that they're running in. And so like you said, it's going to take a number of months before you can actually make see the physical things that you can see. But by that time, the damage is done, right? Because we're too close to the election, the end of the election, and the minds have already been changed simply by allegation.
Yeah, absolutely. So real quick, good morning, Mary Jo. Mary Jo says her daughter, an addiction counselor, was just fired 3 months ago for reporting sexual harassment. Right. So this was my concern in Mary Jo's daughter's case. Now, I obviously don't know the details, but when you make an allegation of harassment, misogyny, sexual harassment, and what you're describing is a bad time. You had a bad time. It was not a good fit. Somebody yelled at you. They hurt your feelings. That does not rise to the level of harassment that we're talking about, that we're fighting against, right? So here is where I have a personal issue, in that if we entertain the level that she's discussing here, then somebody like Mary Jo's daughter is not going to be taken seriously. It'll be dismissed, and I don't want that to happen, right? And what if Miss Jasper Wild, there's something did happen that does rise to that level, and she just didn't talk about it? Why not? And does she not feel comfortable doing that? And how do we move forward that conversation? But in the context of this campaign, she didn't say this happened to me and it's wrong. She said this happened to me, therefore don't vote for him. Right? So we need to pull that layer back, because what she's saying is it's okay for people to die. It's okay for this candidate to throw children out of her office who are crying, begging for Nancy Pelosi to take climate change seriously. It's okay for the homeless crisis to continue in San Francisco. It's totally okay for the oligarchs to continue in the donor class and buy out our democracy because this guy hurt my feelings. And
absolutely.
That's
I mean, all you have to do is look back at the Tara Reid allegations, right? And all she was doing was just telling her story without a narrative, or without a political, trying to gain a political advantage one way or the other, and not talking about voting or anything like that. But she was basically ignored completely. And then you have an allegation like this come up and say, well, because of this, because of my allegation, unconfirmed allegation, this is a reason not to vote.
Right. That's exactly right. And I want to read this statement Mike posted. He said, it's like some people watch the Me Too movement, and instead of going, oh, shit is wrong and we need to fix it, they went, wow, this is powerful. How do we weaponize it for our own ends? And that is exactly what we're talking about right here. So what we've put forward are 3 different allegations against candidates and campaigns that are clearly being weaponized against the campaign and the movement. And the worst part in all of this is where you saw the college Dems and now DSA, who seem to be part and parcel to all of this. To what ends, I don't know.
Well, and this all seems to be, the evolution of tactics, right, on the elite side, because for years and years, all you really had to do was to support your candidates was to just outraise them, right? Just throw money at them, and that was enough to push them over the top. That it didn't matter what their opponents said; it just was whoever had the most money got the most votes. And we're time and time again through this entire election cycle, we're seeing progressives that are getting raising not nearly as much money as the centrists are still coming out victorious. So that's a change in game plan now, right? We can't win by just simply throwing money at this. We've got to change our tactics, and those tactics include, the dirty pool that we've been talking about for this entire show, and that's significant, right? And it's why it's because, like we said at the very beginning, it works.
Oh, it does. And I think from my part, I was a little disappointed in the Intercept, because I did approach Ryan Grimm. I did approach some of their editorial board. I did approach them on social media, on their Twitter, on their Facebook page, and approached them with the FEC data that I had pulled. And I said, guys, you need to print a retraction here, or at least a clarification that, this person said this, however, the information, nothing. Not a word. And for me, somebody who is a supporter of independent media that is supposed to have a higher level of integrity, one that I actually support with my own dollars, I'm deeply disappointed in that, because that to me shows that maybe that level of integrity isn't what I thought it would be in that area. And I, in the same token, I reached out to Miss Jasper Weil several times. I reached out to DSA San Francisco several times. Nothing in return. So as a journalist and somebody who's a chief editor on other things that we publish here, I could never publish this story on our little tiny network, because there's so many indiscrepancies and material facts that contradict the story that's being told. It's just
exactly, and you would think, I guess it's demoralizing, right? Because it's what you thought, you almost take for granted that this corporation or at least this group that you've even financially supported, and I've almost every show you've talked about that. Well, we could just look to the Intercept and see what they've said, right? It's demoralizing, because you want to. And we've talked about this over and over, especially in our organization, about if you live in a glass house, you can't throw stones. If you're going to criticize politicians for their corruption, you've got to take the high road every single time. And that's just the way it is. So you expect like-minded and other corporations and other groups to do the exact same thing. And when that doesn't happen, that's just another strike against our our group and say, look, no, you can't do that. If somebody messes up in your organization, you've got to take the high road. You've got to say, look, we messed up, or we retract this. But no, crickets, damage control. Right. That's very disappointing.
Exactly. So, all right, we are way past the top of the hour. So with that in mind, if you've been watching the show, right here is our Patreon. Yeah, if you like integrity and reporting, and I will personally come out here and tell you where I've done something wrong. I have no problem with that. That's part of integrity. It's part of being an adult. So if you like independent, non-corporate, progressive media for progressives, consider becoming a Patreon member. So the other kind of important thing going on this week is today is day 1 of the DNC convention. So we will showcase some of the activity that's going on. We are part of the media organization that's participating in their updates and their live feed. But what I really want to point people to is the committees. The committees are starting, I think, now. So if we will post a link to that, and if I can get the live feed on our Facebook and Twitter, I will do that, because the committees and the caucus meetings, that's where the sausage is made. You really want to pay attention to what they say and what they do, because what will happen is they'll talk about, oh, we love the Green New Deal, blah, 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 climate change, our children, and then turn around and vote against it. So these are things that you really need to understand. Who's saying what? Who in the committee, like if, for example, if you have a member of the Black Caucus who is making decisions about gerrymandering that don't favor the population that they're supposed to be representing, you'll see it in real time, and you'll know exactly who your friends are. So this is why the committees and those meetings are so, so important.
They're creating, excuse me, they're creating the rules that the DNC has to abide by, right? They have to abide by those rules. They're written into their constitution. That's, if you can have enough progressives with the voice to alter or change those rules, that's how you change the DNC, and that's how you make it possible for more progressives to get elected.
Right. All right. So it looks like Nurse Depp is packing up the camper without you, so I'm gonna let you go so you can go help her.
She's got the box I go in right beside me on the floor. She's gonna jump in and put me on the shelf.
All right, so you will be on your way back home, and then we'll be back here Wednesday, and I'm sure we're going to have lots to talk about with this particular week going on, and the 60 seconds that AOC was given, which is such utter bullshit and an insult. But, it's a DNC. I've come to expect it. Not at all surprised. They're just not trying to hide it anymore. So, with that, if you'll tune in Wednesday, we'll be back. And Friday, we're working on a special guest. So we'll see how that goes. Tune in, I think it's, tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern. We're going to have another episode from Brandon Johnson. And he's got a good interview coming up. So that's it for us for now. Enjoy the DNC convention. Have a good day, everybody.
Take care.
Hammer the dog, we bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Spitting the facts, how it's supposed to be. Hammer the dog, we keeping it G. Whoa.